Joe? This is as warm as it gets. We moved you, Steve. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the CatStrand. Thank you so much for coming out on such a glorious afternoon and evening indeed. We're now quite late, and welcome to our wonderful panel. And I'll be talking and introducing them in one moment. But just before we start, a couple of housekeeping. We're not expecting any fire drills, but if the bells do ring, our ushers will either guide us through that doorway to this side of you or through here, and we'll muster in the car park. There's no interval this evening, except yes, there's a humming noise.
Yes, I was just looking at Peter. There we go.
Yes.
Thank you.
Dull humming noise. No interval this evening. Okay,
nope.
That's right. And there's a thought that we'll be finishing around about nine-ish or so.
Yep.
So I'd like to welcome and introduce Ted Leeming, and thank you very much for coming along. And he will be talking to us, and in turn, we'll be introducing our lovely panel of speakers. And thank you so much for all coming this evening, and have a lovely evening. I'm sure we're going to be thoroughly enlightened.
We're hoping for some ourselves.
Yes, good. We'll do our best.
So, yeah, thank you everybody for coming along on such a good night. I wasn't expecting to see anyone. It's so beautiful out there. Just one other thing to note is that this is being recorded this evening. I think there's video coming forward. It's on YouTube, so if you don't want your face to be seen, don't turn that direction. But yeah, just to let you know, and that's to allow it to be shared with other people, and also to allow us to listen back to everybody's comments. It's not us and them evening, it's just an us evening. This is a conversation. The panel who's invited along tonight, I'll introduce them in a second, but the idea is that they are going to do a short introduction of 5 to 10 minutes maximum, just to stimulate conversation, and then we'll go into a conversation across the room, basically. So they can be directed at the panel, they can be directed at myself, and around the room itself, okay? I think just before we go into it, so I moved up to Scotland about 30 years ago, and from Cornwall, so it's a very different landscape. And I have to say that when I arrived here, I was absolutely gobsmacked and in awe of the beauty. No worries, come in. Of just the beauty of Scotland. It was like nothing I expected. I couldn't believe I was in the United Kingdom. I didn't travel. My elastic wasn't very long when I lived in Cornwall. We were a fairly sheltered bunch. But as soon as I arrived, and a lot of it was with Stu actually, sat in the front row here, we literally every minute that we could, we were up in the hills, climbing up at Glencoe and on the west coast, and I utterly fell in love with the landscape, and ended up actually, that's how I decided I was going to become a landscape photographer. And for about 10 years, that's literally all I did was take photos of the landscape. But what I actually found is that the time went on, and the clue's in the title, when we talk about landscape, we're talking about the visual and aesthetic elements of the land within which we live. And very much the focus often that people have is towards what does it look like. Indeed, when a landscape photographer shoots images, very often they're shooting a highly romanticized vision of the countryside that they find themselves in, excluding the bits that aren't nice, and actually almost designing the landscape instead of actually showcasing what nature is like. And so as time went on, I recognised that I wasn't entirely comfortable with what I was shooting. There was something more that I wanted to get out of what I was seeing, because it wasn't all good. And I'm just going to read a quote. So this is Nature, Scott. So this is the government's own advisors. So the first bit, very familiar. Scotland is famous for its spectacular wildlife and wild places, but it is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. And it's in the bottom 10% of all countries in the world for its quality of its nature. And that absolutely astounded me. And the other one, which is a slight aside, is that having got involved in renewable energy in 1990 was a fact that came out about the same time as I saw that. Half the emissions of human-related carbon put into the atmosphere have been emitted since 1990. Half, over 50% now, because that quote is a few years old. And those two things really shook me and made me decide that I wanted my photography practice to focus not on landscapes but on place, which including within place all the users of any place. So that includes the landowners and the land managers of those places. It includes the communities that live in those places. It includes nature. It includes wider society that comes to any place to visit it and be inspired and in awe or not. And also the commercial interests with respect to any place. And so that became the focus of my own work. And I think that as I was in my latest project exploring that, I basically spent 2 years cycling around Scotland, visiting different land use types, both urban and rural, and that's the exhibition you see in the cafe out there, is what I was seeing when I was out there exploring place. And what I saw was some pretty bad landscapes, or land uses and management approaches. But what I found was that it didn't seem to be that any one use of land was bad. It was generally how it was managed and the ownership model that was an individual's responsibility or a company's or a corporate responsibility that determined what was happening there on the basis of policy as well, coming from the top down. So that really shook me in one sense, but the other thing I saw everywhere I went was amazing exemplars of brilliant, quiet voices doing amazing things. And so that's really what I want to focus on here, is we can't change the past. We are at the present. What we can do is look forward. And so the idea tonight is to actually look forward, and on that basis, and look at what solutions do we need to come up with respect to that future, who needs to be involved, and also how might we all work together, not just as communities, but with landowners, etc., as we move forward. Now, we did want to get some landowners at the front here and some public bodies. Unfortunately, because of PERDA, they were unable. They were very happy to do it afterwards, but at present, they can't do anything. And so what we've done is focus this evening's conversation on communities, and then look at how do we go from here to engage land managers, landowners, and other parties with respect to place. So, and then at the end, what we'll do is we'll try and bring it all together with some actions that we take out of this evening that I can take forward into where do we go from here. And so with that, that's plenty from me. I just have one thing. It's a very open, this is ideas-based. We do need to hear the bad, and if you've got examples of bad practice, that's great. But if possible, try and offer a solution to a problem. because we're trying to look forward and at the positive elements. So that would be very much appreciated, obviously with respect to everybody in the room. And on that basis, I'm going to shut up and hand over to our amazing panel. We have 3 people that look at this subject in very different ways. We're going to start with Julia Farrington, who's come up from Garliston direction, Kilstewr Community Forest, who's you have to go there, but not just go and see the place, but also listen to the passion that comes out of the community and the relationship that they've built with FLS. I'm not going to say more on that because I'll leave it to Julia, but it is inspiring, the work that they're doing now. Most people probably know Helen in the room for one reason. Helen's going to look at things from a community activism point of view, from and the policy perspective. So what are the policies out there that help communities, should help communities get involved in the land use discussions? And then Steve Connolly, who you may know from the recently published Nature Networks for the Glen Kens. Number one bestseller. Apparently all 3 copies sold out instantly to his mother. Who else was it? But yeah, no, so Steve's been looking at, he'll explain it more, but also working with landowners in a very different way to achieve common goals that are of interest to everybody. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to hand over to Julia to give you, these are 5-10 minutes.
I'm going to try.
I've
practiced. I've never made it under 10, so just bear with me. It's an interesting story, I hope, but it's a positive story, and I guess this opportunity has been really helpful for me to really focus on our relationship with FLS, which has been very constructive. And I think from the start, if anybody knows Lindy Rennock, it's no coincidence that we've had such a smooth ride with FLS. She's an extraordinary community liaison officer, and she, I think, has been very influential. It's not a coincidence that we've had a very positive experience with Lindy on the case. So, is my mic, the other mic working? All mics working? That's not working. Never mind. Will that work? No. Oh, what do I have to do to go on to the next slide? Why isn't that working? Am I doing it the wrong way? Excellent. Okay. So that's a precious minute I've lost from that. That's all right. Don't worry at all. So Kilstewr. Kilstewr is a 204-hectare mixed deciduous and coniferous forest. It's an even-age plantation, about 100 years old, surrounded by agricultural land in the Machas, on the Machas Peninsula. In 2018, it was put up for sale by Forestry Land Scotland, and the community rallied around the fear of losing it into private hands. And at the time, it seemed that the only option the community had would be to buy it, but they took another alternative route. They actually formed a campaign group and campaigned to have Kilstewr Forest taken off the disposal list, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, but they were successful. And it was quite some campaign. I can talk about that later if you're interested, but the point was that it came off the disposal list, and at that point, we were offered the opportunity to get involved in some kind of woodland management arrangement with FLS. We didn't know what that might look like, but it didn't seem to matter. Our passion for the forest, our love for the forest seemed to be sort of giving us that opportunity. So we said yes, but as I say, we were a campaign group, we had no woodland management experience, and that didn't seem to matter because we were, now what was the technique for this? That was, we were introduced to a engagement framework that actually has a very, very soft entry level. So The first, I'm assuming that not many people, if any, actually, could you tell me if you've seen this framework? Yeah, it's a really, really good document that's very, very hard to find. So the first level is very, very easy. Basically, it's a volunteer agreement, which is around some kind of activity that the community is engaged with that is outside the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. So it's something that's a bit more involved, carries a bit more responsibility, but it can be anything. In our case, it was path maintenance. The next level up is a memorandum of understanding that best suits a community that has an ongoing relationship with FLS and is involved in slightly more complex things. So you have a memorandum of understanding which is about responsibilities, but it's not legally binding. Then you move up to a minute of agreement, which is if there's some kind of something within that evolving relationship that requires legal recognition. And then there's lease and then disposal. We were from the start encouraged to move up. We weren't ready, but there was no pressure, there was no hurry. But luckily, at about the same time, the land management consultation, the land management plan consultation process was starting. And because we knew Forestry Land Scotland, we dived straight into that. And that's when we really started to be able to articulate our priorities and our vision for the future. We were actually invited to come up with objectives for the plan. We contributed to the vision for the plan. And the plan looks like this, because it's 23 to 33. So we collaborated on the objectives. This first objective was put forward by Forestry Land Scotland, so they were keen to enhance our involvement, which was great. 2, 3 and 4 were our contributions, so you can see that we're beginning to get a sense of what's important to us as a community, increasing species diversity, maintain and enhance access and manage habitats for priority species. The 5th is another FLS objective, which was always a bit threatening. We were never quite sure at that point in those early days. We weren't sure what that was going to look like. Actually, to be honest, we still don't. But the picture improves as we go on. But it was sort of there as a bit of a threat. It was something that we wouldn't have any say over if we remained in that first voluntary agreement position. But if we moved up, potentially we could have influence. Is that the slide I want? Okay, so, oh no, that's right. I want to go back to that. That's giving it all away. Anyway, basically, at this stage, despite the fact that we'd obviously established a relationship with FLS and we'd sort of beginning to get our ideas together, we still didn't know what we would do. We weren't ready to move up to memorandum of understanding, even though it seemed attractive to have more of a say. But then one day we were in the forest with the planning forester, and he waved his hand. He said, "Nobody knows what's in here," and that signalled a real opportunity for the community. We would find out. So suddenly we were the biodiversity lead in this partnership. We were doing citizen science left and right. We were doing all sorts of really interesting things. We were gaining a sense of purpose, a sense of direction and confidence. So at that point we moved up and signed a memorandum of understanding. And the language in the memorandum of understanding, I think, is beautifully, I don't know who drafted it. I suspect it is Lindy. But I mean, I don't want to read it all, but I think that central section, to manage the natural systems of the woodland through data collection to better understand forest ecosystems and how these could contribute to woodland management. I think that shows that our understanding of our role has really developed. We're beginning to understand how, what we need to do to understand what is a healthy ecosystem, how we might support habitat restoration, what does that look like, and all those processes, which we've been involved in. So this next slide just gives you a visual sort of glimpse into the fact that we are very active in the forest. We are doing a lot of species ID. We've got support from Swizik, you'll all know Swizik. We're doing a woodland condition assessment that's been designed for us by ecologists, and it's an ongoing year-on-year design to be carried out by volunteer amateurs, and yet have incredible scientific outputs. We're working on wetland restoration with Galloway Fisheries Trust. and DG Woodlands, and through them we are now part of the SCAMP programme, so our lens has expanded to be a landscape-wide engagement, which is really exciting. We also are very, we're very committed to the well-being of the forest for the future, but also looking after the future guardians of the forest. We've got a very active forest school programme happening in 6 primary schools across the Machars, now fully funded for 3 years. We've just got money from the Kilgallen Community Benefit Fund, so it takes place within the school day. So it doesn't operate for all classes. The years 6 and 7 get the benefits of that in the forest. They're picked up by minibus. So really exciting things are happening. So just a few thoughts about impact. So the thinning. Okay, so the thinning was sitting there as this sort of ominous thing that, people were talking about thousands and thousands of trees being removed, but actually now, a few weeks ago, the contractor that we would like to work with has been given the contract. So this is someone who lives locally, knows us, knows the forest, is going to take wood out on an as and when basis, and is generally concerned to sort of do it within a continuous cover forestry kind of approach. So a very, very positive outcome on the thinning question. We've also, by having that say in decision making, we can demonstrate that we're delivering on Forestry and Land Scotland community engagement strategic objectives. They want communities to contribute to planning decisions in the forestry, so we're doing that. We're also in part responding to the government call to a whole society response to the biodiversity and climate crises, because I think all this work feeds into that. And we're also a much better group of informed people to be in partnership with FLS, and we've got visibility. This is, we are talking about this experience on different platforms in different media, so that's really good. And just to end, I know I've gone way over time, but I just wanted to give some reflections on this. That my impression of the relationship from the FLS's point of view, so highly speculative, is that this is okay. People are relatively comfortable. We have a good relationship with FLS. People are generally comfortable. I feel they don't want to replicate it. They don't want to find themselves having four 1.5-hour planning meetings with many community groups. They would see it as a waste of their time. I think that's a shame, because I think that if the relationship is positive, that the community can actually help the forestry and land deliver on their remit. I think they are being put under a lot of pressure, and commercially, but actually the social and environmental elements of the remit are things that actually the community contribute to very, very fulsomely. And in terms of my recommendations going forward, I would say the policies and the frameworks that we've been offered and that have supported our journey should be much more widely known. And I feel that that this community agreement framework, it's impossible to find. It isn't online. It's not being used. I think that the management agreement is not handed to the community in an equal par with sale and lease. I think everybody knows what a sale is, everyone knows what a lease is, but what's the management agreement? And the problem is it's different in every case, so it's more complex to describe briefly. And it slips, if you look at the literature, it just slips off. It suddenly disappears. If you look at CATs and things like that, the management agreement is not discussed. And I think that if the huge benefit that we're in, and I think one of the most empowering things about this whole thing, which is that Forestry and Land Scotland retain all the financial and legal liability for the forest. And I think that when we think about community empowerment, we often think that ownership is the most empowered position you can have. And I would contest that. I'd say we have got an infinitely more powerful position. We in theory own the land anyway. So let us have an opportunity to contribute our passion, our energy, our commitment, capacity, knowledge, and everything to to improve the quality of land management without ownership. And we're working with lots of people. I just wanted to show this one. So, yeah, lots and lots of different, we've got lots of schools, lots of local organisations, big funders, small funders, and a lot of support. So that's the picture. Sorry, that was a lot longer.
That's fantastic. I think that what amazes me is that I believe it started out almost as a path maintenance programme, and from the passion of a few people, not only in the community, but it sounds like on FLS's side as well, that wanted to make it work, how actually it seems as though a wide range of expertise is now coming to you and sees you as an exemplar. It's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to hold off on questions if you don't mind, because I'd like to get through the three pieces first, and then we'll come in with questions at the end. So, yeah, Ellen.
There we go. Is that all right, Pete? Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Julia. That was really good, so inspiring, really impressive. And I love the partnership working with the public agency, because I think there is an art there, and it's one that we struggle with. So, yeah, no, hats off to you. As I was reflecting on this and thinking of what Julia was going to be saying, I was thinking that actually here in the Glen Kens, I think it's fair to say that most of our land is owned privately rather than with the big public bodies. And so because of that, a lot of volunteers have been working for a long time, supported by GCAT. They've had to take a different approach to it from the one you've taken. So they were working strategically over the years to understand the needs and priorities of the communities, and then to express that through the Glen Kens land use vision, which I'm well aware some of you know more about than I do, but it was published in 2024, and it does set out a few key principles that the communities expressed. And for me, the key strapline that I really like is that everyone who takes value from our lands returns value to it. Because for me, that works on every level. It works on your front garden, and it works all the way up to land owned at large scale, whether that's by whoever. The land use vision also had a vision that land use enhances local climate and environmental resilience, biodiversity and thriving communities, and that it supports repopulation, because we're all on the land. The land has its own value, absolutely, and then the communities have their value within that. And I think crucially that there's a balance of land use. That was come through very, very clearly in the land use vision, that there's this balance. We know that the communities don't have all the answers, but we would like to be part of the conversation. So there's a balance of land use, access and ownership achieved using whole catchment planning. In the vision, still in the vision again, bear in mind it's a vision, not necessarily current reality. To achieve this, we know we'll need strong partnership working with representatives of all the land use stakeholders, so that communities can participate in functional, regional and national mechanisms. So I said it was a vision, not reality. But if there are functional, regional and national mechanisms that allow them, the communities, to effectively advocate for themselves and to influence land use outcomes. But if we come to some of the challenges that the land use vision expressed, it puts it this way: the true seat of power in the land use sector is opaque. No one public body holds accountability. Community interests are not safeguarded, and best practice guidelines are not always adhered to. Statutory routes to effecting the change that communities want to see don't seem to exist, and regulatory bodies are not able to keep up with market forces. Now, this was written a couple of years ago, but I'm not sure too much has changed. And it goes on to say that some of the land use developments appear to be purely extractive. Most profits and benefits are realised elsewhere, jobs are created elsewhere. Community wealth building principles are not embedded, and so the impact of these developments on our communities, they're not a catalyst for more jobs and a circular local economy, so opportunities are being missed. So this is what we set out in the land use vision 2 years ago now, nearly. And I think that as GCAT and all the volunteers who worked on it in many spheres have come to see it, it's all still, I'm afraid, a bit true. So I think Ted's asked me to talk a little bit today about the policy context that we're working in, and to try and see what levers there are that can give us a little bit of power in response to this. So if you are working in this area and looking for levers to pull to get your message heard more clearly by the public bodies, such as the Council, FLS, Crown Estate, then you could perhaps start with the South of Scotland Regional Land Use Framework, the RLUF. The Glencairns is a case study in it, and the executive summary is well worth a read, not least because it is useful to quote back to people. All these public bodies have signed up to this, so it's useful to have it at your elbow. The vision of the regional land use framework is that our plans and decisions about land use deliver improved and enduring benefits for all, delivering a well-being economy through a just transition to net zero and nature positive outcomes. That's what our vision is for how land is to be used in the south of Scotland. With respect to the productive or commercial planting, it references the need to take into account cumulative effects and biodiversity implications. Again, it's written down. With respect to community voice, it says that the idea of community wealth building is well established. This is the vision for the south of Scotland, again, not necessarily reality, where a thriving rural economy directs benefits back into the local community. Alignment with local place plans and the regional spatial strategy has supported placemaking across the south of Scotland, which brings me on to my next point. Local place plans may well make your blood run cold, but if you've heard of them, but I think they're going to play an increasingly important part in the way that the national and regional agencies hear what we have to say. Given that they can't go out and talk to all of us all the time, they will shortcut that by referencing local place plans. I'm seeing that increasingly. Funders also see that if community projects reflect priorities in local place plans, again, it's a shortcut for them as an understanding that this is a project that they can support. So if it's not too late, or if there's another iteration of local place plans, do get involved. I know it's more and more of everybody's time, but make sure that yours reflects your land use concerns, as well as the more village or town-based issues. Dalry's local place plan is a good example of this. It sets out a series of underlying principles about their expectations as to how powerful stakeholders will interact with them. I really like it. The whole thing is definitely worth a read. Have a Google. But, for example, it states that their expectation is that any approach to tree planting, development, or land use change will undergo rigorous assessment considering the cumulative impacts on local biodiversity and landscape resilience. So, and all developments will actively improve our community's ability to adapt to and mitigate the local impacts of climate change through natural landscape solutions. And there's much more in there, but it sets it out. For me, the wider point here is just don't underestimate the power of doing the good community engagement, doing the thinking, and then getting it articulated and written down and published. It just makes it much, much harder to argue with. If you can then use channels that the regional agencies do recognise, like local place plans, then so much the better. But even if you just get it out there yourself, when something's published and has good credibility in terms of community engagement, it's not just Helen's good idea, then it's really hard to ignore. I mean, obviously, they can and they do, but it's harder to ignore. So I will stop soon. The other levers I just wanted to mention quickly. Community Wealth Building Act was passed last month. So I guess my point there is what you're thinking is how is everybody benefiting from this development, this change in land use, apart from me, apart from my community? Don't say that, say community wealth building. Because those three words have heft. And community wealth building is much wider than just community benefit funds from developers. It's not just cash, welcome though that is. It could include building housing for workers, for long-term projects, and then handing those houses over to the community when the project's finished, working with communities to create access roads for recreation, using local companies to provide suppliers as a priority over national ones. I mean, that was great to hear that they're doing that to turn the wealth back. So think ambitiously, I would say, for the systemic changes that your communities need. And if you can find a willing partner, like Julia and the guys, then both sides benefit. That's kind of the point. The Community Wealth Building Act specifically charges public agencies, so that includes the Council and FLS, to use their procurement processes to support local and regional wealth retention and to diversify land ownership into community ownership. This is all new as of last month. So if you are being told no by a public agency, then have a quick Google of the Community Wealth Building Act. There's a lot more power to our elbow now than there used to be. Good Food Nation Act, passed at the end of last year. 6 outcomes. Abby knows far more about them than I do. But in this context, outcome 2, Scotland's food system is sustainable and contributes to a flourishing natural environment. It supports our net zero and climate adaptation ambitions and plays an important role in protecting and improving animal health and welfare and in restoring and regenerating biodiversity. So again, these are national acts, acts and bills that are published and out there. And then last one is the Land Reform Act, also passed at the end of last year. That expands the community rights to acquire land, strengthens transparency around land ownership, and communities now have a right to involvement in management planning for estates over 1,000 hectares. So, these are strong, empowering legislations. So I've not talked much about how you might influence commercial landowners or developers, and running out of time. The private owners, private sector don't have those responsibilities charged on them from the acts like the public bodies do. But they do have shareholders, and many of them have corporate and social return CSR statements, and most of them are probably looking for an easy life. So I think the key here is to establish credibility, make it clear you want to work with people for mutually beneficial outcomes. We can make you look good if you work with us. DG Woodlands is doing some really interesting work in that area, so McNab Laurie is always a good contact for that. I think it can be done, but not to say it doesn't take a huge amount of time and effort, mostly from volunteers. So yeah, I think that was all I had. Just to say a massive thank you. Eyeballing the audience, there's so many people here have put so much time and effort into all of these aspects in their own time. And I hope that this quick canter through the policy frameworks maybe has provided a bit more power to your elbows.
As you change microphones, I'm just going to add to that is actually, as far as I'm aware, quite a few of the sectors have guidelines on how their sectors should be engaging with communities. So I know for a fact that renewables have best practice guidelines, community benefit guidelines. I know that forestry do. I'm not so up to the speed on agriculture. So there's a huge amount of policy and guidance out there, and we'll come back to it after we've gone through Steve's bit. But it seems to me there's some disconnect, some major disconnect going on between intent at the top level, at a policy level, and what actually is being delivered on the ground. So I'm just going to leave that one with everybody, and maybe start thinking, are all these carrots just being eaten, and actually we need to grow a few more sticks. With that, I'm going to pass on to Steve to give his own perspective.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ted. Thanks for inviting me to do this. Ted asked me to talk about something called Nature Networks, which is something I've been doing a bit of work on recently, as he mentioned earlier on. Nature networks are one of the key kind of current phrases in conservation policy. And the formal definition is a set of connected nature-rich sites, including restoration areas and other environmental projects, linked through a series of areas of suitable habitat corridors and stepping stones. That leaves quite a lot open, but it gives you the general impression that this is about networks. It makes a lot of sense at one level, that historically nature conservation has worked with protected areas, and one of the problems with that is particularly in response to climate change, the need to connect areas together so that species and dynamic natural systems can actually move through the landscape through networks rather than being confined to patches of suitable habitat, particularly because those patches then often tend to get kind of eaten away and further fragmented. So it's a very sensible idea. It's very much being driven by Nature Scot and by central government, by the Scottish National Government, but it's supposed to be locally led and governed in some way. And again, that's relatively unspecified. Big question here about what local means. Nature Scot's guidance suggests that although there's an expectation of community projects, that the actual networks are going to be led by local authorities in each of Scotland's local authorities. Again, if you're thinking at national level, that makes a huge amount of sense because you can envisage this national network of protected areas, national parks, nature reserves connected together across the whole country. I think in the real world it doesn't quite work like that. Local authorities are seriously resource constrained, not enough money, not enough time, not enough people. and not enough skills, I think, to be honest, to deliver on something like this, perhaps. So in the local context, a different kind of local kind of cropped up last year. The Glenkens stepped forward and said, well, let's try and do it as a more local area. In this case, the Glenkens personified in Dalry Community Council. And thank you, Morag, Jenna, for making this happen. So they bid for funding to develop a feasibility study to see whether we could actually do nature network work in the Glenkens, which is where I came in because I did the study. The thing that you can't do if you come down to that kind of level, so there's a group of communities, you can't plan across the region, so there's immediately a disconnect with the big idea of nature networks. That doesn't mean you can't deliver something that's useful at a local level. And maybe in ways that will then resonate with other areas, and this can start to be scaled up from the bottom up. So again, thinking about Kilstuar's approach, can we take this way of doing things where it's very much community-led and somehow link that in, maybe using Helen's pressures that you put on the policymakers by quoting back to them their own words, saying, well, maybe we should be doing more of this. I did the feasibility study, the report's on the hub, and I think I can safely say that any day now there'll also be an announcement on the hub, is this true? That we've got funding for a year of development work to do nature restoration work in the Glenkens, which will go beyond, it will include the nature networks idea, but it will go beyond that. So that's kind of, that's current news. Thinking about what's something that Helen picked up on there, the starting point for all this, when you start thinking about nature restoration, the Glenkens doesn't fit the classic kind of rewilding and nature restoration model that people have used elsewhere of either having big state landowners or big private landowners, philanthropic landowners who want to make this happen. It's a really productive landscape, and it's almost entirely privately owned. Well, almost entirely is probably an exaggeration. Very largely privately owned, and there's a huge range of landowners, and they are very, very diverse, whether it's individual farmers, whether it's traditional estates, or investment houses based in London. Who knows where the money is ultimately coming from, and everything in between. So it's complicated, and some of those estates are quite big. They'd actually fall under the new rules about management planning, but many of them wouldn't. So there's definitely got to be something different, and Helen, when she was writing the bid, coined the phrase the third way, that this is looking at a private, how do we do this work, starting with the needs and the capabilities of the private sector landowners in order to make nature networks a reality. So it's got to be sustainable economically, it's got to be sustainable environmentally and socially, all that at once. And it can't be top down. So when I was doing the feasibility study, it really had to be driven by a twin track approach. It had to be led by the ecology in some ways, because if it's not ecologically useful, it's a stupid thing to do. But at the same time, absolutely on parallel with that, it has to fit in with the business models of the land managers. Okay, we want to try and change their practices, but it has to fit in. It's got to make sense in those terms. So I was doing two things at once. I was using a lot of the existing data that we have from places like Swiswick, who got name-checked earlier, and the expertise of organisations like the RSPB and various other, the local expertise. And at the same time, having sketched out possibilities, I was then sitting down and talking with land managers. Some of them landowners, some of them tenants, talking about what they already were doing, what they might do, what they absolutely wouldn't do, what the red lines were, what they might want to do but not now because there's a lot of uncertainty around and they'll decide about it in a year's time. And some of these were really productive conversations, sitting down in a land manager's front room with maps, looking at what could be done, and we nearly, in one case, got as far as planting trees during the course of the project, which for a feasibility study was quite ambitious, and we didn't quite get over the line, but I think those trees are going in the ground in November. So where did I get to with all this? The good news is it's definitely feasible to do it. We can make this work, particularly for tree-based networks, either woodland areas, riparian planting, pollinator networks, hedgerows, things like that. There's a huge potential for improvement of grassland areas in the Glenkens, but it's a lot more complicated and I think will involve much less focus on networks and more on developing, working on an area basis. And I think here's where the new project is going to be really, really important, because it will enable us to scale up away from networks. The less good news is that it's really slow work, at least at the beginning. I have this kind of vague hope that if it takes off, when it takes off, that it will get quicker, because more land managers will come on board and see the value of it. Whereas I think the beginning is really, really hard work. How am I doing? I didn't check.
Pretty much.
Okay. It's hard. Okay, it's hard to get people on board. It's hard to get land managers on board for some very, very good reasons. They're often very skeptical. Some are massively enthusiastic. Some are very, very skeptical indeed. Some think, rightly, in many cases, that outsiders don't understand how their farms work. It's got to be done from their perspective. It's also really hard to do ecologically. We don't know stuff, and the maps are not very good a lot of the time. And that's where some of the citizen science ideas come in. We may actually need to do a lot of research to make this happen on the ground. I'm going to leave my action points then, and you can ask me about those later, Ted.
I will ask you about them later, but I would like you... Sorry.
I've got one final thing, which again is plagiarised from some ideas that Helen had. We talked in the bid about Glencairn's approach to doing this, and the key points were it's going to have to be very pragmatic, very flexible. It's got to recognise the economic and other structural constraints and the scepticism and cultural barriers. We've got to be realistic about this. But there's a set of principles that can really drive this. And one is the habitat principles, that we need to have better habitats, bigger, good quality habitats, and more joined up. The community development principle is a key one here, of starting where people are at. And that's people on the land, people in the other bits of the community, even the investment houses, I think. And I think also then the land use vision principle should drive the whole thing, and that brings us back to what Helen was talking about.
Thank you, Steve. I am just going to very quickly let you come back on one point you said from the farmer's perspective. What do you mean by, because obviously farmers are very important in the Glen. When you say from their perspective, does that mean there has to be a subsidy that offsets the subsidy they're currently getting to deliver, or is it more than that?
It's more than that. The subsidy regime could be crucial here, and I think maybe around grassland, because it's about grazing management practices, is likely to be an area where it's really important. Land managers have got different reasons for doing good things. There was one person I spoke to who wants to bring citizen science onto their land because they think it would be a good thing for visitors to do. It's actually part of an offer to people who are on the land. Other people think that actually having more trees on the land or fencing off an area by the river will improve their own land management practices. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I think the subsidies could be crucial, but they're not the only thing. And also, they're different. Some of them believe in sustainable development, some of them don't, and everything in between. So
okay. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'm going to use my prerogative just to add one other thing to the discussion from my experience as an artist trying to engage with different audiences where you're trying to create change, and that is, let's be honest, if you invite a farmer or a forester to come to CatStrand on a Thursday night, the likelihood of getting them to come to the CatStrand is very difficult. Likewise, young people, this isn't somewhere they see as an environment of trust very often. And so one of the things that I would say is what we try and do is who is the audience that you're looking to engage with, and then trying to identify for that audience what is an environment of trust. So, for example, I'm working with Abby on a project looking at soil, and we're trying to talk to land managers is the fundamental audience. So if me as an artist tells them, I can tell you as the farmer all about soil because I've buried some underpants and I'm exhibiting them at the CatStrand, how many people are going to come and farmers are going to come along and listen and think, I'm going to learn something here? Not many. So the environment of trust is a farm, and we're working with the Barony SRUC are coming along, and we're doing it. So Abby's leading the day with professors from SIUC and also Glasgow University are all coming along, and we're putting the creative side as an additional element to it and delivering somewhere where they feel comfortable, and that means that they're happy talking amongst themselves on the subjects. And I've experienced this. They talk a lot amongst themselves, but very often if I try and have a direct conversation, and it's not just farmers, it's all land managers, it's a lot more difficult. So that's my additional bit, I think, to that. I'm going to throw it out to the audience first and just see, has anybody got an immediate question that they want to pose on any of the subjects that have been raised so far? Abby.
Yeah, Julia, really interested in that community agreement framework, and is that just an FLS thing, or is it any public body? Do you know
It
how
was drafted by the Forestry and
Okay.
and we have got a very valuable photocopy. Very few in existence, but I'm very happy to share it with you. And it's an extant document as much as it was used to for our memorandum of understanding. Somebody up there signed it off, so it's, you know, that channel is open, but just nobody really knows about it.
So with the NHS, I've done 3 sites and did again, sorry, but Mountain Hall site, which were then neighbours of abandoned green space, but there's a community group that really want to take it on, manage it, and the NHS sort of that level of being so risk averse and kind of, we can't possibly let them, but then they really want to let the community use it, but they can't possibly let the community use it. So it's sort of juxtaposition of not having particularly great sort of process on their part. Stick that front of those that they that's it.
Can I ask Abby a supplementary question? That's all right. Have you tried participation requests with that? Did they work?
Might. We could try that.
Because I think they're subject to them, aren't they? They're not all.
Yeah,
Would be.
yeah.
Does everybody know what a participation request is, or would it be worth, Mog, could you just...
Well, it's under the Community Empowerment Act. It applies to most public bodies, apparently not Scottish Forestry for some unknown reason. According to the slide. But yeah, I mean, it essentially means that if you've got a way you want to be involved, even up to sort of management level, you can, I mean, not a full management level, but if you want to get involved with something they're doing, then you've got a right to place this request, and they have to respond to it.
We've got them all around the table.
Yeah,
We've got a steering group made up of like
yeah,
sort of right people.
yeah. So you're already in the room, but I guess
But they just can't get their heads around how to let the community lead without, it's a liability thing. That's what it comes down to. But
Sorry, Peter.
Could I just ask for the recording, if you could pass one of those mics round to the speakers, it'll come
Sorry, I
across
just
a lot
want that
better.
on the record.
Perfect. If you want it on the record.
Could we have the lights on the audience as well as on us now, please?
They are.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm... There we go. Thank you. I'm just going to go back to this policy question of, there does seem to be an intent in the policy and the guidelines at pretty much every level that I see. So, and this is to anybody in the room, because I'm sure everybody's got an opinion on it, is why is there a disconnect between intent and delivery, and what are they, and how can we start drilling down on ways to change that? I'm going to pass it to Helen first, seeing as she was on policy. There you go.
Thanks, Ted. Okay, here's a perhaps slightly exaggerated reaction, but I've spent a lot of time studying why policy works or why policy doesn't work. My feeling would be that the policy doesn't express intent. Policy is an outcome of processes which have got all sorts of stuff in them, and policies have to be produced, but you can't read from that to the intent of any single body, which is one of the reasons there's a disconnect, I think. But it comes, for me, that comes then back to Helen's point, is that once it's written down as policy, it looks remarkably like intent, and so you can throw it back. You can say, but you said this. So even if it wasn't intended, even if it was the outcome of some really blodgy, chaotic process that finally ended up in a document that no one actually really likes, the community can go back to them and say, here's the thing, you said this. Come on, what are you going to do about it? So it's more complicated. It's not that policy is simply a statement of anyone's intent, really.
So how do you move it forward from
But you
where
push
we are
them.
to?
You push them. And you try and engage in that policy process so that the policy that comes out at the end of it reflects more of what you want and less of what maybe other people want. I mean, it's not everything, but that's just, it's a different way of thinking about that process rather than assuming. I suppose don't take policy at face value. Nick's desperate to get in.
I think there's a simpler explanation of the disconnect, and that is money.
Well,
Governments can make policy as much as they like, and they do, but they show their true intent when they apply a budget to it. And at the most scandalous level, COP26 made extraordinary commitments, led by Boris Johnson's team, and they were very proud of them, and it showed how the UK was leading the world in its commitments to fighting climate change. But then if you examine the money that the UK government put behind the policy statements, you discover they are meaningless. Good intentions, you know what the road to hell is paved with. What makes them work is money. And if there's no money, then nothing will happen. And the way you have to address that problem is to create something that is more than a public movement that the governments will produce fine-sounding words for, but something that governments will actually act on. Now that COP26 story is something that was universal across the member states that were part of COP, well, there's the whole world. The money put behind the commitments made at COP26 and subsequent COPs and previous COPs was never anything like what was needed to make them happen. And I think that's the disconnect, and in order to understand how to bridge that, you have to start to work out how to move the hearts and minds of the people who represent us in government.
And on the hearts and minds, thank you for putting your hand up, Roger, because I was going to put you in the hot seat anyway. But on that hearts and minds, going back to my point earlier, because certainly in the industry that I worked in for a long time, that industry always said, industry works much better with carrots than it does with sticks. And I've heard that of several of the big industries. You know, that's how we respond best. Over the 30 years, I haven't seen a great response from a lot of the industries to those carrots. So do you think that the incentive to get heat exchange is carrots or sticks?
Well, when I say money, of course, is carrots. So if you put a big budget behind a policy statement, you'll make that policy turn into reality. If you don't put any money behind it, it doesn't stand a chance. So what I was when I talked about budgets and money applied, that's the carrot. But I mean, I would say that governments operate most effectively with sticks, and governments can make the world turn on a sixpence if they want to, as they did when
Magic money tree, huh?
No, the pandemic. When the pandemic started,
The magic money tree.
well, when the pandemic started, the government stopped the entire country overnight from doing all sorts of things that it had been doing the day before. And we all know the streets were empty. We walked out from one day to the next in the third week of March 2020, and The streets were empty. There were no cars on it. The people couldn't go out. All the shops were closed. Overnight, sticks are the only real way that governments can control the populations that they're representing.
And with that, you can pass the microphone one back to Roger. Could you perhaps respond to that and give your thoughts, Roger?
Well, I switch between pessimism and optimism. Somebody asked me, I think it was you, Andrew, after I'd given a talk, was I an optimist or a pessimist? And tonight I'm an optimist because I've heard what's happening here. And I'm always an optimist when I hear what is happening here, because I think it's a brilliant example, a bottom-up, a focused, forward-looking, enthusiastic, knowledgeable approach. It's a real exemplar. I think it's tremendous. And I'm with Steve. The more these sorts of things are exemplified up into the silos, and I'm coming to that in a minute, the better. And the more that you can talk to other communities that are taking these active, forward-looking approaches, the better. Now I'll put on my pessimistic hat. Sad old man that I am, I've been reading the Scottish Economic Transformation Policy. I've been reading the Good Food Nation Consultation Plan. I've been watching the debates on the Natural Environment Act and the Agriculture and Rural Communities Act. And the rhetoric is way up there, but the reality in government is not there at all, because the government still acts in silos. There's a very interesting example. We've had a minister for agriculture, fisheries, forestry and the environment for years and years. But what wins every time when push comes to shove? Those people who have most influence, and it's the power blocks. It's not just the money, Nick, I'm not disagreeing with you, but it's the power blocks in agriculture. So coming out of an agricultural act, the first one we've had since we've had a Scottish Parliament, it is a tiered system which is still favouring production. And do you know how much of the arable areas are producing food for us? Very little. Most of the crops are going, for instance, into booze. That's there in the statistics. And this is the problem. Most of the forestry grant aid is going into commercial operations to produce timber for the mills, which are commercially viable. We're not addressing these things, and herein lies our problem. We've got a more difficult problem, though, and we haven't mentioned it tonight. It's very interesting, last point, and then I'll shut up, is that if you analyse public opinions about what's worrying them, and we've been doing some work in the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and Scottish Environmental Link have done a big survey recently. What really concerns people, you'll know this anyway without having read this stuff, it's about housing, it's about education, it's about cost of living, it's about health service, and it's about jobs. Environment doesn't figure in that at all. And in any of the debates that you have, I heard one the other night, and environment's not there. So we've also got to think how we register these really important issues so that we get the connectivity, not just the connectivity on the ground. Although I love that map, Steve, and I'd like to be able to use it that you've got in the Glen Kens Gazette. It's actually connecting across these silos that are still alive and well. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, Helen.
Had an interesting visit from the Scottish Parliament. Productive land use. No, the Scottish Parliament have a participation and communities team, PACT, that I'd not heard of. And anyway, they're doing Dumfries and Galloway, which has been brilliant. So we had a tour of New Galloway. And what I learned from their visit is that, and I think it's not a lever that we've particularly pulled in the Glencans before, is the parliamentary committees. I think we've tried individual MSPs, but I think that I think I'd underestimated the power that the parliamentary committees have to scrutinise and hold people to account for the things that they said that they would do. So I think especially as we move into a new government, a new election, new parliament, I think that that's something that we could do as a really concrete way, is make sure that these issues are getting under the noses of the newly formed committees, which might have different titles, you know, they might organise themselves differently, and new MSPs might be, I think there's an opportunity for us coming, regardless of the outcome of the election. So anyway, I feel like I probably should have known that over the last 5 years, but it was new to me, so passing it on.
So it's one thing to say that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
How do you think we should be gathering our forces and communicating to them? Is it through community councils? Is it interest groups? How do you think those processes should materialise?
Yeah. Well, the guys from the PAC team were great. So they have a real outreach mandate, and they are trying to gather data and information to take to the new parliamentary committees, whatever they are. So I would say that right now we've got a good opportunity to get information across. I don't know how it would work in general, but now there's an opportunity.
Is this through?
It would be, yeah. It's a good question. I don't know. I'll give it some thought. Yeah.
The last few years been quite, I don't know which way around this meant to hold this, but been sort of quite closely engaged with the Rural Affairs Committee through the work that I do with the Scottish Agroecology Partnership. So that's the Scottish Agroecology Partnership is itself a coalition of ourselves at Propagate, but also Nature Friendly Farming Network, Pasture for Life, Soil Association Scotland, Nourish, Scottish Crofting Federation, and the Red Breed Survival Trust has just joined. So we're a Scotland-wide organisation that represents the interests of farmers that are more interested in organics, nature-friendly, regenerative kind of systems. So we all have, some are better resourced than others. Land Workers Alliance, for example, and Nature Friendly Farming Network both have policy officers. I don't have that privilege of having enough funding to have a policy officer, but collectively we can lift the voices of our members, and we take that as and are sort of asked to give evidence at various committee hearings, submit our sort of policy positions to all members of the Rural Affairs Committee, specifically on the things like the Rural Support Plan, which was a shambles that Roger was just referring to, that kind of all the rhetoric was there, as you were saying. It was all like, Scotland's going to be a world leader in regenerative and sustainable farming, and they've quietly dropped the regenerative bit very, very quietly out of the Rural Support Plan, and it is essentially the same policy dressed up. So yeah, I guess we've given all the evidence, spoken to the committees, lobbied as hard as we can, and got very few concessions out of it. I guess think my just reflecting on what you were saying, Roger, my approach is pretty much always bottom up, and just sod the policy, just do it. Be the change you want to see in the world, and get on with it, and stop waiting for politicians to do it for you. Because they inevitably won't, because they're always listening more to the sort of larger power bodies like the NFUS lobbies, etc.
So that's an interesting segue into another thing. So how you're doing it through Propagate? That's how you're showcasing exemplar projects and engaging with the regenerative farming community. How else how do you showcase, and how should we better showcase these exemplars? Is there a database? Is there somewhere that this could be brought together and then shared with other communities so they don't have to start from the ground up? What measures could we take to let people know the amazing work that you guys are doing down at Kilsture rather than you sit as an island?
I really don't think it's about the amazing work that we're doing. I think it is about the fact that those openings exist. So it's more about awareness and education around those openings. And I think there's more about the land management plan consultation process, just to be very sort of granular about it, that could be a great deal better. Because actually that also is a way in. It's a point of access that is written into that process. But there is a disconnect because there's no energy behind it. So, but in theory, I mean, just to go back to our experience, so not quite answering your question, but when we were involved in the land management consultation process, which we already knew FLS, they knew us, so we were able to have a conversation. But without that connection, I don't think there would be any action, any movement on anything at all. But in theory, it is an opening. So my feeling coming out of this and reflecting on the good experiences we've had is that all the contact we've had with policy has been positive, because basically I think Lindy's been making sure that we see it and that we act on it. But they are openings for the community that exist. So as much as anything, I think it is about informing the communities that if there is, I mean, there are 64 estates currently under consultation in Scotland, 13 in the South region. It's a constant process. And if one by one, you know, we're feeding some sort of community engagement through that course, through that opening, through that planning thing, because if you express an interest and involvement in theory, and you get a volunteer agreement to back that up, you can start a relationship at that point. So for me, I think it's about much more transparency, visibility, and accessibility to the existing openings. But I know the cynicism in the room will say, yeah, right, but how's that going to happen? But if it's a bottom-up movement to just inform communities, I think that's the most positive way to think about it, potentially.
So could you, for example, as Kilsture, do you have this is what we did?
Well, I have now. I mean, that's been good about this talk this evening, is actually realising how much support we were given at key moments, and that actually the whole thing was down to chance, really. I mean, that's sort of, you know, we were just lucky in all the ways.
But if another community read that, it would
Yeah,
be that
yeah,
they could actually,
absolutely.
It would save them years of...
Yeah, I think it's about making it as replicable as possible. So rather than saying this is exceptional, this should be ordinary. This should be commonplace. Everybody should be doing this, and it's not exceptional.
So how do we, how do we get those exemplar projects where lessons have been learned? Is anybody aware of websites that have libraries of...
And there was a real fashion about 20 years ago for generating those databases of best practice and things like that, and they typically didn't go anywhere. Sorry to be skeptical, doing the grumpy old man, we've been there before kind of thing. They're hard to maintain, they're hard to gather the evidence for. They never seem to work. I mean, there is one, I'm trying to remember what it was, because we were asked recently whether the Nature Network stuff could go on one that I think Nature Scotland must be convening. Can't remember. And it's good, you know, there's some good stuff on it. But there's so many, I mean, again, it's when do you start, isn't it? If a community thinks, oh, we need to know about this, then they will go and then they will find stuff. But it's the getting communities to recognise that this could be a possibility for them. And I think that's not the same as having a database of exemplars. I did wonder actually whether Dumfries and Galloway Third Sector as an organisation might have a role here in pushing stuff out to communities. I mean, if we could get a link in with them, I don't know whether...
Yeah, well, I've made a note to that effect, so yeah.
That was the right person putting his hand up.
We've also
there should be another microphone somewhere.
I've got one here.
He's waiting for his moment.
Okay, so we'll go Antoine, Andrew, and
So I think that the problem is the same here, is that it's still siloed. So I know about like Rewilding Alliances does have a publication about, you know, successful projects or less successful, but it's still a good thing to learn about why it wasn't successful. I know about, like, you know, it could be farming, it could be, I'm sure Abby knows about like some cases about farming. It's still the same, it's, you know, it's siloed. So if you're, you know, you might have a project that is going to encompass, like, it's going to be both farming and rewilding, and it's going to be, you know, and so where do you, I think that that's, it was still, you know, oh, I don't do farming, I'm doing rewilding, or I'm like, I think that there's still this, very much this silo. The other thing that I was thinking of, and maybe it's a question rather than just a thought, it's how do you reconcile natural systems that take hundreds of years with a system, both political and economic, which is short-term profit or short-term